State to which you provide an opening statement.
We do, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Please, the court, counsel. Good morning. Prior to calling witnesses, I want to walk you through the facts and circumstances surrounding the murder of Elizabeth Contreras. Before I can do that, it's important that you understand the family dynamics as it relates to the defendant. The defendant, some time ago, was married to a woman named Alice Diaz. They have 2 kids. Their kids are adults now. Elizabeth Contreras was married to a man named Joe. Guadalupe left Alice. Elizabeth left Joe and married Guadalupe. That marriage didn't last terribly long. They split up. Guadalupe went back to Alice, and Elizabeth went back to live with Joe and their young daughter. Alice and Elizabeth are half-sisters, okay? So as you can imagine, it's kind of a messy family dynamic. Elizabeth and Guadalupe still had some sort of a relationship at the time of her death in August of 2017, but most of the family was in the dark about the nature and the extent of that relationship. Elizabeth even carried an extra cell phone that she would communicate with the defendant on. Alice was unaware of this. Joe knew that Elizabeth still communicated with Guadalupe. He didn't like it, didn't like Guadalupe, as you can imagine, right? He let Guadalupe know that, okay? So that was the dynamics at the time of her murder. In August of 2017, Guadalupe worked for a company called Elliott Electric. He hadn't worked there terribly long, but he had worked there long enough to be eligible for health insurance. And Elizabeth had some health issues. She had some health issues and she was his legal spouse. So she let him know that she wanted to be added to his health insurance. Guadalupe did not want that. He knew that that was going to cause him problems at home, so he kind of tried to put her off. But she persisted. And sometime before August 2nd, 2017, they met up at his work, Elizabeth and Guadalupe, on his lunch break, where again, she persisted. I want to be on your health insurance. So Guadalupe put her off. They went their separate ways. Then fast forward to August 2nd, 2017, Guadalupe went into work like he would any other day. But prior to that, we know that the 2 of them had been communicating by phone all day long. There were long phone calls, short phone calls. They communicated by phone, we have the records, and they made a plan to meet up later that night. Now, Guadalupe at Elliott Electric was a driver, okay? And the drivers, they used work trucks. These trucks were equipped, some of them with cameras, all of them with GPS units that tracked their every movement. Guadalupe used one of those trucks with GPS. That evening, he went into work. Like any other night, he got ready. He talked to his boss before he left on his route. And I say route because they were very specific about the routes that they took. You weren't supposed to go off route. You weren't supposed to make unexpected stops. And if you did, you could be reprimanded. And if you did, they were recorded, right? Prior to going on his route, he talked to his supervisor, and you're going to hear from him. He asked his supervisor for some plastic wrap, okay? His supervisor didn't think there was anything unusual about that at the time, okay? But they were trying to cut costs, and he knew Guadalupe had no reason to need a big piece of plastic wrap, so he told him no. Guadalupe went on his way. He goes down 281 North, he goes on his route, and he has one stop to make that evening, and it's at their Kennedy store. You're going to hear about that. But prior to going to the Kennedy store, he stopped at a location called Chive Drive. It's kind of a cul-de-sac on a street. You're going to hear a lot about this location because that's the first crime scene. He stopped there briefly, he checked it out, he scoped it out, and he went on to the Kennedy store. You're going to see an image of him at the Kennedy store holding that big piece of plastic that he wanted, okay? He gets the piece of plastic, he finishes his business at the Kennedy store, and he leaves, heads back to the office here in San Antonio, but before doing that, he goes to Chive Drive, okay? Elizabeth, in the meantime, is in San Antonio. At about 10:30, she leaves her house. She lives with Joe and their young daughter, Emma. She leaves the house. She tells him, I'm gonna run into work. She works at a hospital. I'm gonna check on some things. Joe didn't think that was unusual. You're gonna hear from him as well. She had kind of a funky schedule at the hospital. I'm gonna go into the hospital and I'll be home after that. She didn't go into the hospital. She went to Chive Drive, where her and Guadalupe would meet up regularly. She went there, and she never left there alive. We know this because at that crime scene, her blood is pooled on the asphalt where it looks like a tire is pushed over it. The blood is around the rim of the tire. Her hair is also on the asphalt. So we know that she was killed there, okay? Because there's her blood, her hair on the asphalt. After Guadalupe killed her, he loaded her into her car. It's actually Joe's car that she borrowed, but loaded her into the back of a small SUV. We know this. We'll talk about that in a second. He drove her around the corner of the street to an electrical easement that cars drive up and down, and you can tell because the grass is smoothed out. There's a tire tracks, okay? He drives down the electrical easement, he dumps her body in the woods, puts a branch over her, takes her clothes, has her phones, and leaves her there for the next 6 days until she's found. He then gets in her car, he drives it off the electrical easement, he parks it on the side of a highway on Old Pearsall Road, he walks through a field, back to his truck that had been stationary for 51 minutes, and he drives back towards San Antonio. How do we know this? Because we have 3 cell phones, GPS, that are tracking each other the entire way. And you're going to hear this information, the triangulation data, the GPS data, the cell phone data, from FBI Special Agent Mark Sedgwick, who's going to walk you through all of that and the phone calls that led up to their meeting. So he headed back to San Antonio, but before he did that, his GPS and these phones showed that he stopped on 281 around the Almost Basin area, so not far from downtown. And he stopped there for several minutes. He threw her clothes, he threw her cell phones over the side of the highway. That's where they were found. That's the last place they pinged. That's the last place her family located her on their phones. And he drove back to the office, okay? He drove to the office and again had contact with his supervisor, and his supervisor didn't think much of it then because Guadalupe wasn't acting like he just murdered somebody, but he noticed that Guadalupe was a little bit disheveled and he had a leg injury, okay? He had a leg injury that he didn't have before he left. And he had a black shirt on and shorts, you'll see these in photos, that it looked dirty, okay? Almost like he had dirt on him. Guadalupe finished his business up there, left with Alice, because that's who was picking him up, and probably thought and hoped he had gotten away with murder. But what he didn't count on that evening was that she had a family that cared very much about her, that took immediate action. When Joe woke up in the middle of the night and she wasn't there, he knew that that wasn't normal, okay? Elizabeth would never say she was going to come back and not come back. She would never leave their daughter. She would never not show up to work the next day. So Joe and the sisters and the family started communicating immediately, looking for her, calling her cell phone, pinging her cell phone. It was located at the Almost Basin and never moved. That was unusual. So they made a missing persons report. Joe reported the car stolen to get the cops involved in that aspect. And they made a post on Facebook asking the community for help if they've seen anything or seen the vehicle. And sure enough, somebody responds to that and says, hey, I saw a car that matches this description out on Old Pearsall Road. So the family goes out there and the police go out there, and sure enough, it's Joe's car. You can peek in the window and see Elizabeth's purse in the back seat, or in the front seat, which is unusual. You can see Emma's car seat that's in there, some of her toys. When the police process the car, they find blood everywhere. There's pooled blood in the back where he put her in the back of the SUV. When they do the blue light, you can see the outline of a body curled up in the fetal position, the pooling of the blood. There's blood on the interior sideboards. There's blood on the steering wheel smeared around it like somebody tried to wipe it away unsuccessfully. They took the car in, and so now they know it's a murder, right? And by this time, they had some of the cellular data. They had some of the information about who she had been in contact with, and so they began their investigation. So they bring in Guadalupe Contreras on August the 5th, and they talk to him. And of course he says, I didn't talk to her, I didn't see her, I don't know what happened to her. But they know that's a lie, right? Because they have the phone records, they know who he talked to and who she talked to. But that's not enough to arrest him, so they let him go. They also know that he lives with Alice, and they know that Alice and Elizabeth aren't the best of friends, so they bring Alice in to question her. She paints a totally different picture of the dynamics. She also tells them, I know exactly what he was wearing that night in response to their questioning. He was wearing a black shirt, some cargo shorts, and as a matter of fact, I haven't done the laundry yet. So she invites them back to her home to get the clothing, and they do. And what do they find on it? Blood. So they take that in as evidence. and they continue their investigation. They bring Guadalupe back on the 11th after they have more evidence, and they arrest him. And I will tell you, like Lauren said, we don't know how he did it, but we know that her blood is pooled on the asphalt in the location that they met. We know that his car was stationary and her car was moving to where the bodies were dumped, and all the phones go with it. We know that her body's found in the woods. The autopsy will show you that she had irregular defects on her skull. She had trauma to her skull. She had a broken hyoid bone, like she was maybe choked. There was plastic, little torn plastic, like what he was holding in that store in the car. We have all sorts of information that lead directly to him having murdered her. We don't know what he used because, like somebody pointed out during jury selection, sometimes animals would eat the body or decomposition occurs, and that's exactly what happened. By the time the ME found the body, or by the time the police found the body, all of the internal organs had been eaten. The skin on her face was gone. Her body was unrecognizable. And unfortunately, you'll have to see photos of that. They identified her with dental records, but like I said, there were defects in the skull that wouldn't have been there absent some sort of blunt force trauma. So we're here today to determine whether or not he's guilty or not guilty. And I'm telling you, it's been an exhausting procedure because he has lied every step of the way to his family, to her family, to the police. Up to this day, he's lied. I'm asking you to finally hold him responsible and find him guilty of the murder of Elizabeth Contreras.